defining your vision, defining what success is at the beginning is so important within the organization. And for me, on day 1 to 60, and so I'm still kind of in that range, it's doing the ABCs of supply chain correct. And the people that know me know that I say that all the time. And, getting products to our end users readily available, making sure the visibility to inventory there, the end-to-end procure to pay is there. And so really doing the basics. And then from there, you just implemented a system that the ceiling isn't even identified yet.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
This week on Power Supply, we speak with Eric Swaim, Director of Strategic Sourcing and Supply Chain Analytics at Texas Children's Hospitals. We're going to be talking about successfully implementing an ERP, and Eric is the perfect person to talk to about this because he's just going through it, and it's gone live, and he's about 4 to 6 weeks, I guess, into implementation after the go live. And so we're catching him at the right time while everything is still fresh in mind. And he can also sit back a little bit and evaluate how the implementation went in the early stages, Hayes.
This is going to be a great interview, listening to him talk about all the factors that go into implementing an ERP, and come along and listen with us.
All right, we're going to be right back after a short break with Eric Swaim, Director of Strategic Sourcing and Supply Chain Analytics at Texas Children's Hospital.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
Joining us now is Eric Swaim, Director of Strategic Sourcing and Supply Chain Analytics at Texas Children's Hospital. And Eric, I'm really excited to talk to you today because this topic is about successfully implementing an ERP. And I feel like everybody is going through this process right now or has very recently. And it's not an easy one. It has a great deal of impact, obviously, across the entire enterprise, thus ERP. But what we're going to be talking today about is true transformation in going through that process and really having a vision for the future. So I just want to thank you for coming on the Power Supply podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Eric, let me just jump in right fast, just right off. I mean, obviously, the pain of implementing an ERP can be a lot, but what about being an Auburn football fan? Which one's harder?
Probably this year is probably Auburn football, but I would say probably 99% of the time it's implementing an ERP. Actually, but ask me in 2 weeks when we play Alabama, and I may give you a different answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't want to throw a little shade at you there, but I thought I had to ask that.
By the time this comes out, we'll know how Eric feels.
Yeah.
But Eric, to make you feel better, I'm a Tennessee Vol fan. See, so I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. I've been there for about 12 years, so I understand.
All right, Eric, why don't you tell everybody, all the listeners, a little bit about yourself? Give us some background on Eric Swaim.
Yeah, absolutely. So Eric Swaim, Director of Strategic Sourcing and Supply Chain Analytics at Texas Children's Hospital. Been at Texas Children's for about 7 years, held a couple of different positions there. I have responsibility over our strategic sourcing, contracting team, purchasing, equipment planning, value analysis, our item master team, our data team, and our systems, which kind of brings me here with an ERP go live. And I've really enjoyed my last 7 years at Texas Children's. We're the largest children's hospital in the world. We also support a 500,000 member health plan based in Houston, Texas, and love working for that organization.
Well, there's just been a ton of talk about technology and even the workforce shortage, right? That's hitting everybody really hard right now. And I think a lot of times everybody's just saying we've got to just throw technology at it. Like it'll solve all the problems. And, you know, when you and I talked, you kind of said, hey, look, technology is necessary. It will drive the industry forward, but it isn't a simple answer. It doesn't just make everything better, does it?
No, it definitely doesn't. And actually it complicates things if you don't plug it in correctly. You have to have a good foundation. And it's really the technology that enables your business processes, your people, to make your processes easier, your people's jobs easier. And so when I look at it, and when I started this transformational journey and this technology transformation at Texas Children's, you look at three components. You look at your people, who you have within the organization. You look at your processes, the procedures, the policies, everything that governs what those people do. And then you look at your operating model, how we're structured. And you really have to focus on those three things if you're going to do it right. And I think for people, it's easy for them to say that they can get that right. But in practicality and implementing that either right before an ERP to parallel is actually quite difficult with this day and age in supply chain.
And like, what are some reasons, you know, for that? Like common obstacles? I mean, I can imagine that people part. People don't always love change, right? So as you just said, you know, I got to imagine there's some objections, you know, like, why do we have to do this? It was working fine before. This is going to make my life harder. But I'm sure there's a lot more to it than just that.
Yeah, and just from a supply chain perspective, you hear a lot of words get thrown out, you know, like more efficient, better visibility, better data analytics, and then you hear transformation. But no one really, what you have to do is you have to define what that means, you know, and it might be different at every organization depending on the organization's goals, their values, what they're trying to strategically accomplish. So I think the first big obstacle is really internal. It's trying to figure out, okay, as an organization, what do I want to accomplish? What does transformation mean to me? Mean not only across supply chain, but HR, finance, IT. What is our end goal as an organization so we can all align on it and then get our teams marching towards that?
And that's a really good point, Eric. And let me ask you this. First of all, was the ERP system that you had in place good or bad? Why did you change? How long did it take you to make that process, you know, the examination of it to know that you were going to go to another system?
So our previous ERP was PeopleSoft 9.1. I did not think it was great, but I'm sure there are people within Texas Children's that loved it. They grew up with it. They've used it for the last 25 years. We took a 1.5 year process to evaluate which cloud solution we were going to go with for our ERP. So we knew one of our goals was to get to the cloud for those quarterly updates, for those consistent improvements. And so we made that decision early on that we weren't going to go with an on-premise solution. We were going to go to the new ERP solution. So we did an RFP process, and parallel to that process, we focused on fixing those other three components that I talked about, right? We looked at our business processes, we looked at our people, our structure, and we looked at our operating model, and we said, what can we foundationally change to make this implementation simpler for us, make it move faster, and make us better overall? And so ultimately, it was about 1.5 to 2 years. COVID kind of stretched it to 6 months. We kind of had to pivot to that pandemic, but it took us a little bit to get there. And then we started last September of 2020.
I think that speed piece is such a great point because anytime a project gets drug out, you start to lose it. So you might have got everybody kind of in alignment before you launched and everybody felt like they had, skin in the game and they had a stake in it. And then all of a sudden, if the project starts to lose its way or it takes a long time or you hit a lot of barriers, don't you feel like that becomes detrimental, to the attitudes of the people that you had already gotten to sort of say, okay, let's adopt this, let's make it happen?
Absolutely, because so there's two pieces to that. And the first one is the team. I mean, absolutely. The last 14 months, it is a lot moving ERPs. When you think about, I think we had 120 business processes across finance and supply chain that we essentially changed overnight. But people get worn out going through an implementation. You can't go through it for a long period of time because you start having turnover within your project team. People lose focus. People get pulled other ways. And it's really important in an ERP implementation that people keep focused on the vision and the transformation that your organization has aligned to long term. And then I think the other thing to speed is that with the cloud, there's only so many decisions you can make because you're restricted in the amount of changes that you can make to the system. And so what ends up happening in some organizations is they stretch these implementations to 24 months, 18 months, or even longer, whatever it may be. And people spin. They forget the guiding principles that they align to. They start to kind of question decisions that they've already made in testing cycles, three times down the road. And that can be detrimental to a project because you're not all thinking again on the same vision, implementing towards that vision and continuously moving forward.
So Eric, as I sit here and think about all the different stakeholders in this process, who were the main drivers, number one, and then how do you define on the timeline? Or obviously you've had some hiccups clearly with COVID and other things, but are you kind of tracking to what you hope to be on the timeline?
Yeah, great question. So the selection process and the implementation process were pretty much the same stakeholders. HR, finance, and supply chain are the groups that you must have at the table. They're obviously the decision makers for HR, recruitment, onboarding, learning, core HR functionality. Finance is all the income statements, the balance sheets, all the financials, and then supply chain, getting the supplies from end to end, procure to pay. And then obviously our IT partners are kind of at the bottom. When we went through selection process, we're about 14,000 employees and our selection committee was around 97 people. So we got feedback from around 97 people and got consensus to move forward with the platform Oracle Cloud that we essentially moved forward with. The only change from the stakeholder group that we had from RFP to implementation was you add a system integrator, an implementation partner, which adds a lot of boots on the ground. It's needed. I honestly think picking your implementation partner is equally as important as picking the software because that's knowledge that no one else has that they're bringing to the table, to the forefront. They're making recommendations to your team by the hour on business processes that you'll have for the next 20 to 25 years. Ultimately, our project team was about 130 people, and it's still ongoing. We did successfully meet our timeline of going live with supply chain and finance on October 4th. So we're about 6 weeks in to go live right now. And we're going live with payroll and HR on January 4th. So we're about 54 days out.
So staggering by quarters. And I really like what you said about the integrators. And I'm wondering, because obviously it depends on the solution that you're going with for your ERP, who you're going to choose as your partner. But what are some other considerations, that other supply chain leaders might want to have in mind as they're kind of looking for that integrator?
Yeah, absolutely. So doing your research on, the implementations that the system integrators and implementation partners you're considering have done with organizations that are similar in size, similar in scope, the level of experience of the actual people that will be implementing bring to the organization. So not the people selling necessarily in the room to you, the business, but the actual boots on the ground individuals. I think it's also important to consider the model that they pitch. So do you want your organization doing all the testing, for example? How is their approach to change management? Is it all virtual? Probably now it is, but when we were considering it, that was a big component to us. Do we want training, change management, communication all delivered in a virtual way? Or are there other unique strategies that you can enable? Who's going to do all of your reporting? Who's going to do your integration building? And then finally, how will you transition all of that into a sustainable model once the implementation partner leaves? And so those are a ton of different components, but it's necessary that you look at each model that the system integrator brings and pick the right one for your organization.
How did you get access to the staff who are actually going to do the job, the boots on the ground? I feel like a lot of companies kind of keep them in the background. Did you find a way to interview some of them, or at least, leaders amongst different project teams to gain that confidence? How did you get that knowledge? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we didn't interview everyone because you would never get the project off the ground because of the amount of meeting you would have to do. But for the key leads and individuals, yeah, we met with them before we started the project. We signed off on the project team in a period called mobilization, which is before you start kind of the design. And we made sure we were not only just a group of people trying to implement Oracle, but the right group of people that could work together, know that you could pick up the phone, call each other, and we had a sense of collaboration already built heading into it.
I think that's fascinating. I never really thought about the partner that you're talking about and how the vital role they'll play. But I guess what I'm thinking about too, Eric, is when you made the decision, I'm assuming that did you do site visits or talk to your peers that actually implemented the same software? How did that go?
Yeah, so reference calls were huge on both fronts. So we RFP'd not only the system, but the implementation partner. There's not a lot of people in healthcare that are on cloud. If you look at the main players, there's not a lot out there. It's hard to find an organization that exactly looks like yours. I wouldn't say we're in the early adopters phase. We're kind of past that phase, but it's still hard to find companies that mirror exactly what you're looking at. But we did, talk to organizations, very candid feedback about what the systems can and can't do and their level of maturity right now. And then you not only have to look at who implemented them or who went live with the software before, but where's the software headed? Like that was another big thing for us. It's a 25-year investment. That's what people forget. Like, do I really care what it looks like right now, or do I care what it looks like 5, 10, 15 years from now? And that was a really hard component to evaluate at Texas Children's. You had to look at who are their strategic partners? What does their development roadmap looks like? How is that development roadmap influenced? And so all of those components wrapped up gave us a good indicator of not only the partner we're signing up with today, but the partner that will be there 5, 10, 15 years down the road.
It's kind of hard to pick that company that you feel comfortable in 20, 25 years because a lot of things can change in the IT world.
Yeah, you kind of take your best shot, right?
You're right.
I felt like we did a good job. We did a comprehensive assessment, and at the end of the day, we kind of laid out what our evaluation criteria was. And if it's an investment for the future, you got to look at the future. You can't just look at the now.
So does that factor in as you're defining success? Because as you said, it's a 25-year commitment and you're laying out what you think is going to be successful. I'm sure short-term goals are, can we continue to do, business operations without major disruption, right? That's probably your primary goal. And I'm sure there's other short-term goals, but as you define success, How far out does that go? Is there a 10-year marker where you're going to look back and say, was this a success? Or is that just too far out at some point? You're invested in this is the solution you're on. You don't really need to continue to evaluate the success factors. Obviously, you have to continue to consider if it's working for you and if it needs to be tweaked. But
yeah, and great points. What are our short-term, like, how do we know we're successful? Like, that's essentially the question. Like, when we plugged it in 6 weeks ago, is flipping on the system successful enough? To a degree, absolutely, on the project team and the work they put in to make it operational end to end. I absolutely commend the entire team at Texas Children's for that. But did we get our money's worth? Did we get the investment that we're looking for? And that's why I think defining your vision, defining what success is at the beginning is so important within the organization. And for me, on day 1 to 60, and so I'm still kind of in that range, it's doing the ABCs of supply chain correct. People that know me know that I say that all the time, and, getting products to our end users readily available, making sure the visibility to inventory there, the end-to-end procure to pay is there. And so really doing the basics. And then from there, you just implemented a system that the ceiling isn't even identified yet. Whereas your on-prem ERP systems, you were at the ceiling. And so how do you build from there? So we're already doing things like plugging robotics, RPA, into the system. We're already doing some real-time reporting on what our inventory utilization is. We are talking about stuff like chatbots and ordering stuff via Alexa. And so those are kind of like the dream big things, but you can't go from A to D. You got to go from A, B to C to D. And so absolutely getting the basics right, but then how do you inch your program and your department a couple of steps each quarter, each year to get to that ultimate goal? And then as Hayes mentioned, technology changes. So my goals may change with technology changing. I may be asking my ERP to talk to drones in 2 years to deliver products from my warehouse to the hospital. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I was sitting here thinking, Eric, you're talking about a 20, 25-year timeline. 25 years ago, we were still on dial-up modems. Most people didn't have cell phones. We didn't have Yahoo. We didn't have YouTube. So in 25 years, Amazon. So in 25 years, it could be radically different, to your point. So.
Right. And so I don't want to implement the system today that can do all of that. I want to implement the system that you can build upon to get to that.
Amen. I think you're right on.
And it's interesting. I think that's part of the reason why you chose, a SaaS solution instead of an on-premise solution, because you knew that would sort of be able to drive that. And just listening to you talk about drones and ordering through Alexa, trying to get a vision and people excited. I mean, that's the reason to get excited for doing an ERP. That is when we talk about true transformation and transformational change for an organization. It's those kinds of things that you're talking about that really light me up and think, wow, that's also going to take advantage of, the younger crowd that's coming into this industry, right? And the way that they already interact with the world to give them tools that they're already used to using so that they can do their job more effectively, even though they might not have the experience that some of the leadership has. Is that another reason for kind of looking at like this cloud-based SaaS type provider versus something that is local?
It's very intuitive. Absolutely. I mean, the training plan, I'm not saying our training plan was like the best ever, but we essentially gave our team access to a dev environment, a test environment. They played around for a couple of weeks. We told them what was changing, and they went in and they knew exactly what to do. And then they didn't know exactly what to do because of the manual I put in front of them like I would in an on-prem solution. They knew because it was intuitive. It's built like an Amazon. It's built so intuitively that this clicks the next step. And they even have tools that sit on top of the applications now that help you with the click by click. We have a tool that sits on top of the system that you essentially say, I want to do this process, and it says click here, click here, click here, and it walks you through it. Change management strategies like that too make it not only easier for the younger generation, but even the older generation who might be nervous about their job changing, with this implementation. That was something at Texas Children's. We value our employees above, patients and employees second. We wanted to make sure that we took people along this journey with us and that they didn't feel like they didn't have a seat at the end of the day. And so it was really good to see how intuitive these systems are, how easy it is, to your point, Justin, to navigate the system, to learn the system. And I also think it's really important for growth, going back to what you said with the quarterly update, knowing that the system changes every 3 months. If it wasn't intuitive, it would be extremely difficult to keep up with. I would have to have a staff of 10 to 15 people running around at our warehouse, at our dock, and our purchasing team, showing people what's changing. But because it's so simple and they do it gradually over time, it's helpful.
So what kind of end-to-end integration opportunities are here? Because at the end of the day, what I love about what you just said is you're able to really move the pace of play. And so with everybody being able to learn with that, software that sits on top of it for training and just really allowing people to self-learn the solution based on what's applicable to the task that they're trying to accomplish in the moment, that's fantastic. But that means it can keep moving. So ultimately, you're trying to get to a point where you're going from one end to the other end of the entire organization and just make all of that go smoothly, not just the supply chain component and the training, but how everything moves from one department all the way down to revenue cycle, right? So what are some of those opportunities maybe that were a priority for you and your organization as in terms of making this move?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say this first. If your organization wants best of breed on everything, and when I say that, I mean best of breed on learning, best of breed on recruitment, best of breed on inventory, best of breed on purchasing, an ERP consolidation is probably not for your organization. There are a lot of pros to an ERP, but ERPs do it all. They're not best of breed for every little pocket, because companies thrive on, creating the best of breed in their niche industry. And there's a place for that. But if your company is one of those people that wants best of breed for everything, an ERP consolidation is probably not for your organization. At Texas Children's, we didn't want that. We wanted the integration. We wanted someone to log into one place and view their payroll information, their comp information, but also go order supplies or view the invoices against their vendors. And we consolidated, I think, over 13 systems to one with this implementation, wow, which was one of the big value props for us. To Justin's point, the end result, specifically on a supply chain side, I'm fully integrated with our GPO. I can see when vendors, manufacturers are charging me differently than the loaded pricing that I have. I can run a real-time report that shows me every PO, a PO line against what contract and where I have discrepancies. I have better integration with our EMR, with our Epic system on charge capture, because our item master is set up optimally to receive those charges and build upon it. And then lastly, clinical connectivity. It really concerned me during COVID when we could not accurately we could, quickly we couldn't pull out of PeopleSoft what we were using. And it goes back to, I have 200 eaches in a box in this box of gloves, but then in this box of gloves, I have 300 eaches in a box. So how many gloves do I use? And that sounds like a small problem, but when you get into units of measure and you have 3-4 different packaging strings, you buy it in a different unit of measure, you stock it differently in your warehouse versus different PARs, it's very hard to put that together. And the new ERPs, at least the one we went with, does it very well. And so we're able to report on the utilization at each level. I can tell you how many Sani wipes we have sitting in our warehouse right now. I'm not sure I'm proud of it, but I can tell you how many we have sitting in our warehouse right now.
Eric, let me jump in right there. As you describe what you can get out of this system, I can see you get excited, which is great because obviously, you had these siloed systems before and now you have it in one place and it's going to make your job and supply chain a better place. So it's fun to watch you actually, because we're watching on video, by the way. And so it's fun to actually see you actually get excited when you describe it. So well done. Congrats on what you've done.
Oh, I appreciate that. During the whole utilization thing, during COVID, we couldn't even get to, the each level. And so to be able to see my team pull it out and do it very easily and then pass that information along to our clinicians to help with patient care is absolutely one of the biggest goals we have.
So it reminds me, as we're wrapping this up, of an interview we did on interoperability with Vin Matozo, and we were, just talking about all of that. But I want to tie it into sustainability here because just as Hayes said, or as he was commenting on how it's obvious how passionate and how happy you are to have moved into this state with the organization, but you said 13-1. I'm wondering if the interoperability that you just described with this system, with Epic, with your GPO, et cetera, does that actually help you with sustainability? The fact that it is so interoperable?
Yeah, it definitely does. And, sustainment, I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's really an important point when you talk about ERPs and cloud, because a lot of people say to have a cloud ready mindset and to be ready for change. And it's important for organizations, supply chain in particular, to be ready to make some tough decisions around how you're going to sustain the system long term. What a buyer did and previously isn't what a buyer will do in the future. And the shift of work, where some of the work goes from doing processing transactions to more of maintaining a catalog and maintaining the data integrity is super important. And so not only during this journey do you have to look at the people component in the process, but how you're sustaining it and moving people around to make sure that you have that longevity and sustainment of the success so that you can build upon it is super important.
All right, Eric. Well, this was, not only is it a great interview, but it's a great story. And you really painted an amazing picture of what the future might look like. Ordering on Alexa, drones delivering, from the warehouse. And already some of that future that I think a lot of people are going to be jealous about that you're literally living today, where you can tell us how many Sani wipes you have. And I think, you described that at the unit of measure, but that's been a major frustration for a lot of people over the last 2 years, even more than ever, right? Especially with the back orders, and you're not necessarily able to run that just in time kind of inventory. And that's where a lot of that major disruption in healthcare has really come about. I think a lot of people have had to live that on a day-to-day basis. So anyway, I really enjoyed this interview. It went very quickly, and I want to thank you so much for coming on. And do you have anything to add before we wrap?
No, I appreciate Justin, your time and Hayes' time. It's been great to talk about this topic with a couple of people. I know it's an interest around healthcare, and I'm happy I could take the time today to talk through it.
You did a great job.
Well, we're really glad we got a chance to talk to you while it's still fresh on your mind as well. I think the timing was perfect.
It wasn't. If you would have asked me 3 weeks ago, I probably would have deferred a little bit. I think we're a little bit out of that stabilization period. I think for those of you about to go live, if they tell you it'll take you 2 weeks to stabilize, they are lying. It will take you 4 to 6 weeks to stabilize.
All right, everybody, that was Eric Swaim, Director of Strategic Sourcing and Supply Chain Analytics at Texas Children's Hospital, and we're talking about making a 25-year commitment to an ERP And true transformational change, I just love the picture that he painted for us, Hayes, around drones and ordering through Alexa. But I think ultimately one of the most key pieces of information from this interview for supply chain leaders out there was really that conversation around the integrator and some, good tips for how you're going to evaluate who your partner is going to be. Because honestly, this is an enormous financial commitment that a healthcare organization is going to make. And I do see great benefit in going with a cloud-ready, cloud-based solution, because if you really want to evolve over that next 25 years, that's how it happens.
Absolutely, 100% agree. And he did bring up some really, really good points. And trying to come up with something that's good for 25 years is crazy. But clearly, they had a lot of thought, had a really good roadmap, and he had some really good points.
Yeah, really engaging all the front line, but selling the vision to leadership is what really gets everybody in alignment for something as big as an ERP conversion project. So that's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support Power Supply by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. You can also find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or search for Power Supply on your favorite podcast application. We've also got bonus content for certain episodes. You just got to download our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. And on behalf of Hayes and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply.